The Wellcome Book Prize came to me and they asked me if I wanted to take part in a blog tour, reading one of the 6 titles that had been shortlisted for the 2017 award. And honestly, I almost said no, until I saw what book it was they wanted me to read. The Wellcome Prize celebrates books that further the understanding of medicine. And I'm no doctor, no biologist, no student of sciences. I had assumed that it celebrated books that weren't for the likes of me. But when I was presented with When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi, it gave me pause. This was a book on my radar, and a man I had heard about, who had kindled curiosity in me and a want to read his story. So I read it, and it is a brilliant book, but a hard one to talk to you about. When Breath Becomes Air is the autobiographical recounting of Paul, who has trained all his life to be a doctor, and then finds out shortly before he's due to graduate that he has terminal cancer. He speaks with earnestness and poise, and from a position of unapproachable authority. And it is impossible for me to give you some blithe summary of it without that summary being obvious as the trite, pale thing it is. What I can talk about, though, is what this book brought forth in me, and why I would ardently recommend others seek it out and meet with what he has to say. Firstly, I found meaning in the literary way he writes, heavy with reference. I've had a great many therapists during my time. Counsellors and psychiatrists, good ones and bad ones. For me, the best of them spoke of books. And that is the manner in which Paul writes. He curates and quotes. In this book, he has become a vessel, long trained and steeped in knowledge, through which lived experience has been poured. He specifically talks about that dichotomy between the academic and the lived in, between reading and being. He has honed both highly and yet kept them in balance. He has witnessed and himself gone through the extremes of mortal existence. But what makes this a book is that he can communicate that in deep and thought-provoking ways. I should also say I couldn't escape the fact that for once in my life I was reading non-fiction, and that there was a real person and a real person's family behind this book. That couldn't help but change the way I read it. By the time I read his book, Paul was 2 years dead, but he had really sat down and struggled with what on earth you do when this diagnosis lies at your door. When you have to figure out what to do with the time that remains of you, when you don't know how achingly short that time might be. It burned into me that we all live according to the priorities of an expected lifetime, assuming that we'll be able to do things in an order that might not present itself. It's often touted, but still true, that repetitive realization that books about death are really books about life. In fact, books about medicine are actually books about life, just viewed through another lens. In When Breath Becomes Air, Paul talks not only of his experience as a patient, but his experience as a doctor, seeing both sides. He talks of physicality and its interaction with ideas of self, and he talks of the physician as guide in making space for life reimagined. The reason this book exists is that Paul's time was short, shorter than it was supposed to be, but he clearly gathered much in that time and crafted it into his story, into a communication that espouses on the human experience and that is quietly revelatory. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope that gives you some insight into the book. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read it or plan to read it. The winner of the Wellcome Prize will be announced tomorrow. I'm kind of hoping it's this one. Bye, guys.